Welcome back. So this vignette is on numeracy. This whole course has been one long soliloquy basically on the power of biological numeracy. Before I go into that, I want to make sure it's crystal clear my incredible respect and regard for the entire broad sweep of the different sciences that have been brought to bear on studying the living world. I recently gave a vignette in which I commented on sort of the snobbery of those working more and more, quote unquote, in vivo relative to those that aren't. This was in my vignette on the quote, the so-called real biology. And in that, I gave a number of examples from biochemistry that I thought were incredibly enlightening. And so I think my point is that I do not want to be a partisan. And I think that those of you listening that are interested in science should not become partisans to a particular point of view. Biochemistry is amazing and beautiful. Genetics, wow. Can you imagine that people figured out the things that they did? Just think about the 1950s and 60s when many of those complicated metabolic pathways that you see on charts, on walls, those were the result often of genetics. You know, people actually figured out which things depended upon which things by genetic knockouts. Cell biology, amazing. Modern electron microscopy, you know, Keith Porter and people like that, and the things that they learn about the apparatus of trafficking in cells, developmental biology, evolution, you know, all of it, it's awesome. And in a time like this where facts and knowledge are under siege and where people don't think that rational discourse is a way to learn things, we need to stick together. So I'm just trying to say, I'm not trying to, my particular shtick, the thing that I enjoy and that I want to do has to do with numeracy, but it's by no means trying to say it's the only way to go or it's the required way to go. Clearly not, since so much of our understanding of science was based on things that didn't involve numeracy, and that even involves Faraday, frankly. You know, he was a great physicist that didn't know how to do algebra, but, you know, certainly didn't know calculus. So anyway, biological numeracy. With apologies for this remark that comes from Charles Darwin. He's a product of his time. He's a product of when he was living, so his use of men here would not at all make sense in the modern world, but I think that the content here is what should be thought about, and in my sense, with an apology for the remarks here about this applying only to men. So he says, in after years, I have deeply regretted that I did not proceed far enough at least to understand something the great leading principles of mathematics, for men thus endowed seem to have an extra sense. So I would like to say for people thus endowed seem to have an extra sense. So what does he mean by this extra sense? What he means is that by opening up the problem such that we investigate it from the numerical or mathematical point of view, it requires us to sharpen our thinking in a way that words could never do. And so, you know, as I say here, in some cases you can't even know if you were surprised or not without the quantitative dissection of the problem. And so, you know, let me give you an example. The moon, as it goes around the Earth, if I remember correctly, the number is that the point of farthest approach rotates by about 3 degrees per month. And so, you know, I can just tell you that fact. And then I can ask you, you know, is that surprising? And of course, you have no basis to know whether that's surprising or not. But for Newton, it was surprising because he calculated 1.5 degrees. So that was surprising to him because he had a prejudice. He had a preconception based on the law of inverse squares. And so that's what this biological numeracy idea, I think, really points to. I believe that I showed this earlier, and I'm just going to say it again, that, you know, Faraday, Michael Faraday, one of the great experimentalists, you know, he had already conceived this idea of lines of force. And I just wanted to point out, you know, that what Maxwell has to say here is when I had translated what I considered to be Faraday's ideas into a mathematical form, I found that in general the results of the two methods coincided. But at any rate, you know, he was taking Faraday and it became more potent by virtue of mathematicizing. I've made reference to this quote or this comment in this paper by Jeremy Gunawardena, but I'm not entirely sure that I actually showed this paper during the course. So this is a really wonderful paper that Jeremy wrote called Models in Biology, Accurate Descriptions of Our Pathetic Thinking. And here I'm going to read you a part of the paper where he's quoting from James Black, who, in his Nobel speech, said models in analytical pharmacology are not meant to be descriptions, pathetic descriptions of nature. They are designed to be accurate descriptions of our pathetic thinking about nature. I love that. And then Jeremy says, just substitute systems biology for analytical pharmacology, and you have it. So the point is that it's not that the model is claimed to be accurate description of the world. It's meant to be an accurate description of how we think about the world. And what I have to say, there's an article which I'm not a big fan of by Scott Gilbert, in which he talks about the deceptions that come from mathematics. But what I don't understand about his argument at all is when somebody draws a biological cartoon, I have no concept of how it can be conceived that that's somehow more accurate or more precise or a better description of our thinking than at least attempting to mathematicize that thought. I think we're all pathetic thinkers, mathematical or not. And mathematics is just another tool in our toolkit that allows us to try to root out our specious thinking, and I am so often amazed with my own stupidity and with how I think I know what's going on and then I don't. And this has happened to me over and over and over again, scientifically and not. And I sometimes in my class I tell people, as an 18-year-old, I made a $500 bet with somebody about something that I thought I knew and understood, and I lost that $500 bet. And another thing that happened to me as a high schooler, and then I tested it myself at Caltech, was, one of my friends came into class in high school, my last class in high school, and he was being really a jerk. And at some moment, he punched the teacher in the face and ran out of the room, and the teacher chased him, and we were all flabbergasted. Another teacher came into the room and told us to write down what we had seen, and we all did. And then 5 minutes later, the two of them came back together, and they had staged this. And we read our descriptions. I keep it in my office at Caltech because I just need to remind myself how we saw different things, and that should give us pause. Well, I did this myself. So teaching freshman biology, the first day of class, some kid sitting in the front row sneezed and said, "Bullshit." And I stopped and I'm like, dude, you should be more imaginative. If that's the best you got, that's pretty old. And so he sent me an email, and I said, I wasn't bothered at all. I've got a stunt for us. And so 6 weeks into the course, this kid came into class late, dribbling a water polo ball, and about 10 minutes later, the ball hit me in the head, and I chased him out of the room. And I came back, and I asked the students what had happened. A couple of them told me they had seen this person named Paul, and he had thrown the ball at me. And then another young woman student raised her hand, and she said, I happened to be watching, and Paul gave the ball to Tommy, who was the goalie on the water polo team. Tommy's the one who threw the ball at you. And I said, yeah, that's what happened, because we staged it. And my point is that, it's just easy to fool yourself. And so I like this thing from James Black, because he's telling us, one way you can sharpen your thinking is to mathematicize it. Okay. Then there's this really great paper from Ray Goldstein. Are theoretical results results? The abstract is wonderful. The answer is yes. And so, Ray, I'll just read you here. The decision letter from the journal was very supportive. It was clear our paper would be published, but one of the referees definitely did not like the way we had combined experimental biology and physical calculations in our paper. The data should be described and the inferences drawn, and the modeling relegated to the proper places as quantitative verification of the inferences that can be made directly from the data. Sorry, I'm going to speak strongly. I just think that's just nonsense. It's just blatant nonsense. So this particular person has an axe to grind. They have a point of view. I have a different point of view, evidently. So does Ray. And it takes all of our points of view to make the world go round. And I'm sorry, but data does not stand by itself, at least according to my sensibilities about how we think about the world. I'm going to re-quote Poincaré. A science is built up of facts as a house is built up of bricks, but a mere accumulation of facts is no more a science than a pile of bricks is a house. So, at any rate, so Ray does a beautiful job here of talking about, what theoretical results are and how they stand on their own. So here I give you three examples that I have, talked about one of them kind of, but of the role of theory in showing us unexpected connections. So in the upper left, the pictures are of Sewell Wright and Ronald Fisher, and the experiment there is from Bury on genetic drift, where basically he took 8 male and 8 female flies and mated them. They were heterozygotes for orange eyes. They had one white and one red allele, and then he looked at the fixation in the population. Really beautiful stuff using the binomial distribution, which we worked out earlier in the term. Second picture is of Howard Berg on the left and Edward Purcell on the left. And this is a really great thing having to do with how long you have to make a measurement in order to achieve a certain level of accuracy. And then regrettably at the bottom, it's Hodgkin and Huxley, and I have not had a chance to talk about that. But in that case, they, in a certain sense, had to posit the existence of ion channels because of mathematicizing their thinking. These are all three examples where mathematicizing our thinking, this goes back to this notion of biological numeracy, allows us to see things that we would not see otherwise. And I made this point earlier as well. This had to do with figure one theory. So the idea that theory can be ahead of experiment. So I just repeat, this is Asakura and Osawa. Direct experimental proof of the reality of the force derived here has not yet been obtained. To me, as I say up at the top of the page, it's a badge of honor. It's not something that one needs to apologize for, that there's no data yet, and it's specious to say that people that are sitting there thinking, pure thought alone, do not contribute to science if they don't have some data. That's just not true. It's demonstrably not true. So, and it's not true in biology, it's not true in chemistry, it's not true in physics, not true in astronomy, geology, whatever. Pick your topic. So, so the bottom line is that I guess I want us all to sing Kumbaya and be a little bit more tolerant of each other, even though I'm speaking passionately and maybe I sound like I'm being intolerant. I'm not. I'm wholeheartedly supporter of those that go out into the world and just look at stuff and don't have a hypothesis. I support that. I support having data. I support having ideas. I think it takes all these different things together, and the history of science tells us that all of them have been important. I just wanted to end on a note on this. This is my vignette on numeracy. I wanted to end on a note of a debate that Marcus Meister, a colleague and friend of mine from Caltech, had over some magnetic effects that had been reported in the literature. And this is really about numeracy, I would say. So he says this is an analysis of how magnetic fields affect biological molecules in cells. It was prompted by a series of prominent reports regarding magnetism in biological systems. And then he says later, here I argue that these claims conflict with basic laws of physics. The discrepancies are large, from 5 to 10 log units. To me, this makes my soul sing, even though I'm sure it was really a painful exchange for all the parties involved, and you'll see that a little bit in what I say, and it's probably not resolved, and probably people's feelings are hurt for good about it, but it makes my soul sing, because the bottom line is that this is just the use of biological numeracy as a scalpel. I don't know who's right in this whole thing, but I certainly support what Marcus had to say, and I agree with his thing about the 5 or 10 log units. So I'm not going to go into the details at all. You should go read the paper, but equation 6 is the first of the relevant points. I've talked about dimensionless ratios, deterministic versus thermal energies. I've talked about it many times, and basically Marcus is just saying, hey gang, I'm worried about the fact that there's 5 orders of magnitude difference between your deterministic energy and thermal energy. How will the system overcome the thermal energy? And good question. Absolutely critical question. You see it again in equation 14. There's 9 orders of magnitude off between the deterministic energy and the thermal energy. So, Marcus is trying to make the point here. Remember, thermal energy is 4 times 10 to the minus 21 joules. That's the blue spot here. And over to the right, these are energies that are larger than that, and so you could believe that magnetic effects will overcome the thermal energy for those cases. Over on the left, he's showing these examples from the literature in which the thermal energies are bigger than the magnetic energies in play. And I wanted to, again, I'm not trying to call anybody out per se, but they had a heated debate. And what they say in this response is, in his paper, Meister incorrectly states our collective view on the operative mechanism. I don't agree with that. What he says is just basically that there is a deterministic energy and a thermal energy, and one has to address the question of how to think about that discrepancy. While we are considering several hypotheses, we agree that the precise mechanism is undetermined. Lastly, although mathematical calculations can often be used to model biologic phenomena, when enough of the relevant attributes of the system are known, the intrinsic complexity of biologic processes can in other instances limit the applicability of purely theoretical calculations. It is our view that mathematical theory needs to accommodate the available data, not the other way around. We are thus surprised that Meister would stridently question the validity of an extensive data set published by 2 independent groups and a third using a different method without performing any experiments. So I guess what I want to say to this is that once again, I don't agree with it. I don't agree with it. I mean, of course, one has to think about the data, but to pretend that the data is paramount and that the data is right, as a systematic statement is not so. We need to bring all of our tools to bear so that we don't become like the people in Washington, D.C., and that's what's strident, is dogmatically asserting that a thing is known unequivocally. And the bottom line is that no, calculations and numeracy are not subservient to data. That's not, I do not advocate that point of view. So I'm expressing my point of view. Friedman and company, and he's a very, very distinguished scientist. So I'm not questioning that. He's made more discoveries than I probably ever will. So I'm not questioning that either. I'm just saying that fundamentally, the assertion that they make here that mathematical theory needs to accommodate the available data is not so. And once again, it's like history is on my side on this one. Whether we're talking about astronomy and the motions of the planets, three-body problem, we can go on and on and on. Bottom line is that getting the data right is hard. And I have plenty of examples from my own lab where we've tried to measure the same thing in more than one way, whether it's fluorescence or quantitative westerns or whatever. We can make really tiny error bars, and yet the two measurements don't overlap with each other. That means the error bars are not the real error bars. That means they're the error bars about our reproducibility on a given method, but they're not the error bar I care about, which is I want to measure the thing. I don't care how I did it. I want to measure the thing, and I want to know how well I know it. And when two methods don't agree, then that tells me something about, not about the number, it tells me about something about our methodologies. So anyway, this was a long discourse on biological numeracy, one of the main points. But let me end, since I've been, in my usual sort of passionate way, I may have sounded like I was taking things away from people. I am a fan of biochemistry. I am a fan of genetics. I'm a fan of cell biology. And all of those in the absence of numeracy. They're amazing. They've made huge strides. They've discovered so many things that I basically at times I just have to pinch myself with disbelief at how many things that we've learned. But the point of this course, this is this course. I'm the one teaching this course. So in this course, I'm trying to add another tool to your toolkit, and I'm saying that numeracy is itself a really powerful tool. And if people like the authors of these papers on magnetism do not subscribe to that, that's their issue, not mine. I'm saying that history is on my side, that we see over and over again, that mathematics, numeracy sharpens our questions. It allows us to dismiss our wrong ideas more quickly. And all of us have wrong ideas. I know of no exceptions to that. So that's the vignette.